SHASN comes from the Sanskrit meaning governance, rule, or regime, or alternatively, throne or seat of power. In this game, you are a politician trying to win an election that will decide your nation's fate. I'm going to teach you how to play this game in minutes here on Legendary Tactics. First of all, let's look at how to win. The game ends when all possible majorities in all zones have been formed, and the player with the highest number of majority voters wins the game. It sounds simple, right? Well, the route to victory won't be that easy. Let's begin with the setup. Each player selects a player mat along with a bag of voter pegs and an IOU token that matches the color of their mat. As you might expect in an election game, players vote to determine who goes first. Players cannot vote for themselves. If there's a tie, vote again. Once the first player has been decided, players take turns clockwise from there after that. Player 1 then receives any one resource of their choice from the public reserve, also known as the resource bank. Player 2 gets any 2 resources, player 3 gets any 3 resources, and so on. Players keep resources on their player mats. Select a campaign and remove any ideology cards if desired, based on whether they have a content advisory, as indicated here. Shuffle that campaign's corresponding decks of ideology cards, conspiracy cards, and headline cards. On the HQ mat, place the conspiracy cards, the headline cards, and the voter cards. Draw 3 voter cards and place them face up in the allotted spots. On the board, there are 9 zones where the election is contested. In order to form a majority in a zone, you need to influence more than half the voters there. The fraction shown in each zone lets you know how many total voters there are, and how many of your own voters you need to get the majority. Every voter peg has a blank side and a side marked with its party symbol. Non-majority voters are placed on the board with their blank side up. As soon as the majority requirement is met, a majority is formed immediately in a zone. Flip over as many voters as were required to form the majority with their party symbol side up. Each of these voters earns you 1 point during end of game scoring. Placing more voters in an area where you already have a majority doesn't get you any additional points, although they can be useful to safeguard a majority. These voters will be placed with the blank side up. The majority can be broken through certain powers and effects. If this happens and a player doesn't have enough voters to meet the majority requirement, flip over the affected voters so their blank side is up. Let's take a look at the resources in the game. There are 4 resources in SHASN, and they are all of equal importance. The green ones with the diamond in the middle are campaign funds. This is the support of corporations, both financial and otherwise, that are reflective of a pro-business stance by your candidate. The blue ones with the eye in the middle represent media attention. Obviously, politicians live in the public eye, and the more media attention you get, the better. The red ones with the fist in the middle are street clout, representing your candidate echoing populist sentiments that gain them credibility with the majority. And the yellow ones with the star in the middle represent public trust, which is earned by the good intentions of your candidate and how the populace senses that. And if you see a question mark, it indicates that a player can spend any resource of their choice. Players earn resources from ideology cards and ideologue powers, which I'll get to a bit later. There is a default resource cap for each player of 12, which can fluctuate through the game. This means that if a player ever has more than their cap, that player must choose and discard any excess resources down to the resource cap, and no actions can be performed until this is done. You can trade resources and even conspiracy cards with your opponents, and this can be done in any ratio. However, at least one resource must be exchanged by both parties, and at least one of the trading players must be the active player at that moment. Trades can be initiated at any point during your turn. Ideology cards cannot be traded unless specified otherwise. Resources can also be utilized in auctions, which are initiated by certain events in the game. You can bid up to as many resources as your resource cap during an auction, even if you do not hold that number of resources as you bid. If you win the bid, you can pay off the amount in successive turns. The seller takes your IOU token and keeps it above their player mat to keep track of how many resources are owed. A player cannot make any purchases until they have completely paid off their bid. If nobody places a bid for an auctioned item, it is discarded and the minimum bid value is received by the active player from the public reserve. Voters can be influenced through voter cards, which can contain 1, 2, or 3 voters. Each voter card is a combination of resources which must be paid to the public reserve in order to influence that many voters and place them on the board. There's no limit to how many voters you can influence in your turn. After paying the resources, which is called influencing the voter card, a player places their voters in a single zone and must be placed by the end of the same turn, otherwise those voters are discarded. It's important to note that voters received from a single voter card cannot be split across zones, but voters obtained from any other means can be split. If there aren't enough empty areas left in any one zone to place influenced voters from a single voter card, all the voters from that card get discarded. After a voter card is influenced and played, it is discarded and players immediately flip over a new one from the draw pile to replace it. If the draw pile is exhausted, shuffle the discarded voter cards to form a new deck. Ideology cards help you to earn resources. At the beginning of every player's turn, the player to the right of the active player draws the top ideology card and reads both sides aloud to you. These are reflective of important policy questions that a candidate might be asked. Some cards are marked with an exclamation mark at the top right, indicating a mature or sensitive theme, and some cards are marked with a double exclamation mark, which indicates a very sensitive issue that might be difficult for some people. Please feel free to remove these cards if you want a less controversial game. The active player must choose between the 2 available answers, each of which corresponds to an ideologue and yields a different set of resources. Keep the ideology card hidden until the active player has confirmed their answer. After giving your answer, keep the card under your player mat with your answer face up and receive the resources listed on it. After giving your answer, keep the card under your player mat with your answer face up and receive the resources listed on it. Before the active player answers an ideology card, that player can choose to have it redrawn by paying any 4 resources to the public reserve. If this is done, the player to the right discards the card and draws a new one. Either answer given to an ideology card aligns with a different specific ideologue. There are 4 of these: the capitalist, the supremo, the showstopper, and the idealist. As you collect multiple cards belonging to ideologues, you unlock their powers. The colored band at the bottom of the card denotes which ideologue the answer belongs to. Ideologue powers are as follows. Every ideologue has a passive power, which is that for every 2 ideology cards you hold of theirs, you get an extra resource of that type. Each resource corresponds to one of the 4 ideologues: the capitalist with campaign funds, the supremo with street clout, the showstopper with media attention, and the idealist with public trust. Collecting 3 ideology cards of a single ideologue unlocks their level 3 power. Collecting 5 ideology cards of a single ideologue unlocks their level 5 power. These powers can be used in the same turn in which they're unlocked, and you can have multiple powers active at the same time. You can use these powers every turn as long as you still hold the required number of ideology cards needed to keep the power unlocked. Each player will build a unique combination of ideologies and powers every time the game is played. Now let's take a closer look at the gameplay. As mentioned before, at the start of the turn, the player to the right of the active player draws the top ideology card and reads both sides aloud. The active player must choose between the 2 available answers, unless the active player pays any 4 resources to the public reserve in order to draw a fresh card. After confirming your answer, keep the ideology card under your player mat with the answer face up. Receive the resources that correspond to your answer and any other resources earned from passive ideologue powers. Then check your resource cap. If you cross it, choose and discard any excess resources down to your current cap before taking any other actions. After that, you can take any of the following actions in any order to the extent that you can afford them. Number 1, influence voter cards, where you spend resources to influence open voter cards on the HQ mat. Number 2, place influenced and evicted voters on the board. Number 3, form a majority by influencing more than half the voters in a zone. Number 4. Trade resources and conspiracy cards with players. This can also be done before answering the ideology card. Number 5. Buy and or use conspiracy cards, where you spend any combination of resources to buy the top conspiracy card or cards. You may use them immediately or save them for later. These offer a wide range of boosts and attacks and are purchased for any 4 or 5 resources as denoted by the cost on the back of the card. You can use them immediately, at any point during your turn, or save them for later. You can also use one right before an opponent answers their ideology card and begins their turn. Players can only buy the top conspiracy card in the draw pile, and there is no limit to the number that you can buy, hold, or play, one after the other. If 2 players use conspiracy cards at the same time, they will be resolved in turn order. Number 6. Utilize any unlocked ideologue powers. Number 7. You can gerrymander voters. You get gerrymandering rights in a zone by having the most voters there. In the game, gerrymandering is when you move one non-majority voter in or out of that zone, or in between 2 adjacent zones every turn. You want to gerrymander to disperse your opponent's voters and then consolidate your own. You can only gerrymander non-majority voters, which are those that are not used to form majorities. You can gerrymander any voters, including your own. If you gain gerrymandering rights in a zone during your turn, you may use it that same turn. If 2 or more players are tied for most voters in a zone, no player has gerrymandering rights there. Voters in volatile areas cannot be gerrymandered. Having even 1 voter in a zone with no other voters gives you gerrymandering rights in that zone. However, you may not move your only voter out of a zone in this way. There are also some volatile areas which are indicated with this symbol. A voter peg in a volatile area stays there permanently and cannot be gerrymandered, converted, moved, or affected in any way. You can either place your own or an opponent's voter into a volatile area. At the end of the ongoing turn, if your voter is placed in a volatile area, a headline is triggered. Draw the top headline card and resolve it, as it can result in a variety of lucrative opportunities but also devastating penalties. If multiple voters are placed in volatile areas during a turn, that many headline cards will be triggered and resolved in the order of the voters that were placed in the volatile areas. Now let's look at the endgame scoring. The game ends when all possible majorities in all zones have been formed. Every voter used to form a majority is worth 1 point, and the player with the highest number of majority voters wins the game. Please note that only the total number of majority voters will be taken into consideration during scoring, not the number of zones you capture, and non-majority voters do not add to the player's final score. If every single voter area on the board gets filled without all the majorities having been formed, every player will play their final turn, starting with whoever filled the final empty area. If players are tied, there is an optional way to decide the winner, which is a calculator put online by the designers. You can get there by going to www.playshasn.com/privilege. And that is how to play the board game SHASN. Thank you so much for watching. We hope you got a lot of value out of this video, and if you did, please take a moment to like, comment, and subscribe down below. Thank you for watching. This is Legendary Tactics.